I eased the key into the lock, already imagining the quiet comfort of my own living room. Monday had chewed me up and spit me out, back-to-back meetings, a last-minute client crisis, and a commute that stretched like a bad joke. All I wanted was the familiar hush of home. But as the door swung open, my stomach clenched. My parents were inside, not just visiting, packing. My mother's hand froze midair, a stack of my folded sweaters balanced against her chest. My father crouched by the bookshelf, sliding my journals into a cardboard box labeled studio apartment in his blocky handwriting. Harper. Mom's voice cracked with false cheer. You're early. I gripped the doorframe, pulse thudding. The scent of lavender cleaner, hers, mixed with the faint citrus of the candle I'd left burning that morning. My silk blouse clung to my skin. I suddenly felt overdressed in my own apartment, like a stranger who'd walked into someone else's life. What are you doing? My voice wavered, a brittle edge of disbelief. Dad cleared his throat without meeting my eyes. Just getting a head start. So the move won't be overwhelming for you. The move? The words scraped my throat. Mom smiled a tight, apologetic smile. Sweetheart, that tiny studio we found will be perfect. We thought we'd help. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her. The room tilted, and every unspoken grievance, every childhood slight, rose like static in my ears. I can still feel the sting of that night, as though it stitched into my skin. It was late spring in Ohio, the air heavy with the smell of cut grass and the sweet bite of lilac. I had just come back from my final college presentation, a folder of notes pressed tight against my chest like some fragile piece of my future. Inside our small two-story house, voices carried through the hallway, low at first, then sharp enough to splinter the air. My parents, Linda and Robert, stood in the living room with cardboard boxes already half-packed. Mom, I set my folder on the entry table. Why are my books in a box? My mother's hands paused mid-fold, the crisp snap of tape hanging between us. She wouldn't look at me. My father cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the muted glow of the television. We thought we'd help you, he said, each word clipped and efficient. The studio on Ashford Avenue. You sign the lease. You'll be moving there after graduation, anyway. We're just getting you started. A hot, metallic taste coated my tongue. I sign that lease for next month, Dad. Finals aren't even over. It's better this way, Mom murmured. Less lingering. Less lingering. As if my presence had become an untidy guest overstaying her welcome. I felt the weight of all the unspoken years pressing down, how my parents measured success by tidy milestones, a safe job at my father's insurance firm, a sensible fiancé, Sunday dinners where no one raised their voice. But I had chosen a different path. Design school, a portfolio of bold colors and bigger dreams. That's not helping, I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to study it. That's pushing me out. Dad finally looked at me, his jaw tight. You've made your choices, Nora. We're simply making sure you follow through. Nora. My own name suddenly felt like a word they no longer claimed. The room blurred. My throat tightened until each breath scraped like sandpaper. I grabbed the folder from the table, my fingers shaking so hard the papers rattled. Behind me, a quiet voice floated from the doorway. My grandmother June, silver hair pulled into a soft bun, eyes clear as winter sky. Take this, she said, slipping a small brass key into my palm. It opens doors you haven't imagined yet. Trust yourself, honey. Her fingers lingered over mine. Warm, sure, unyielding. That key burned in my hand like a silent promise as I walked out into the lilac-scented night, the house shrinking behind me with every step. When I first stepped off the bus in Portland with a single carry-on bag and $87 folded inside my wallet, the city smelled like rain and roasted coffee. I tilted my head back to catch the drizzle, letting the cool drops wash the taste of betrayal off my tongue. I promised myself right there, at the corner of 10th and Morrison, that no one back home would ever define my worth again. I found a room in a shared apartment above a bookstore. The rent was cheap, mostly because the windows rattled every time the streetcar passed. At night, I'd lie awake, tracing the cracks in the ceiling like a secret roadmap. My day started at dawn with the hiss of the espresso machine downstairs. I worked double shifts as a barista, each cup of cappuccino buying me one more day of independence. The turning point came one rainy morning when a woman named Marianne Hale strode in, her umbrella dripping onto the checkered tile. She ordered a flat white, then lingered at the counter while I wiped down the espresso machine. Marianne owned a small but thriving interior design firm, and she noticed the sketchbook I'd left open beside the cash register, pages filled with room layouts and color palettes I drew to calm my mind. She asked if I had ever considered design professionally. I nearly laughed. My college applications had been shredded in a storm of family arguments long ago, but Marianne's eyes held no trace of pity, only curiosity. "Talent like that," she said, tapping the page with a perfectly manicured nail, "deserves a chance." Within a week, I was assisting her on small projects, mostly organizing fabric swatches and carrying heavy boards of paint samples. But Marianne had a way of making even the most menial tasks feel like apprenticeships. She critiqued my sketches gently, teaching me how to balance light and texture, how to tell a story with a single room. The hours were brutal. I'd rise before dawn to prep lattes for the early crowd, then sprint across town to measure spaces and photograph fixtures until late evening. My feet ached, and my fingers were often stained with graphite and coffee grounds. Yet every blister felt like proof that I was building something of my own. 6 months in, Marianne handed me my first solo project, redesigning the lobby of a boutique hotel. I poured myself into it, layering warm wood panels and amber lighting until the space glowed like a captured sunset. The day it opened, the hotel owner clasped my hand and said, "You've given this place a heartbeat." Word spread. One client became 3, 3 became 10. I saved every penny, tucking away enough to rent a small studio, this one my own, no rattling windows, just wide white walls begging for sketches. Back home, I kept my updates vague. If my mother texted, I'd reply with a cheerful emoji or a single line. "All good here." I never mentioned the checks arriving in my mailbox, the design awards starting to collect dust on my shelves. Because this success, my success, wasn't for them. Not yet. I heard the telltale creak of the front door before I even saw their faces. My parents stood there in the entryway of my downtown loft, frozen like 2 statues carved from guilt and shock. Mom's eyes darted around, scanning the high ceilings, the sweeping city view, the pale gray walls hung with original artwork. Dad's jaw tightened, as if he couldn't quite reconcile what he was seeing with the daughter he had pictured in a cramped studio apartment. I stayed seated on the velvet charcoal sofa, legs crossed, the quiet hum of the espresso machine filling the pause. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. I let the silence stretch, a slow, deliberate ribbon of time. Mom's voice cracked first. "Hannah, this place you live here?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone light, almost casual. "I've lived here for a while." Dad stepped inside, his gaze catching on the tall bookcase lined with hardcovers and the sleek white marble of the open kitchen. "But you said," he cleared his throat, "you said you were moving into a studio. We wanted to help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help." The word slipped out like a small, sharp laugh. Mom clasped her handbag tighter. "We were just worried. We thought you'd need a little push to settle. We didn't want you drowning in bills." I gestured toward the gleaming grand piano near the window, a gift I'd bought for myself the day my company's revenue hit its first million. "Bills haven't been a problem for a while now." Their silence was thick, almost heavy enough to touch. I stood and walked to the glass wall that overlooked the city. The late afternoon sun cast long ribbons of gold across the hardwood floors. From here, I could see the same skyline I used to dream about when I was 21, clutching my grandmother's old silver locket and a second-hand laptop. "I guess," I said softly, turning back to them, "I never really told you how things turned out after I left." Mom swallowed hard. You started a business?" "Yes," I replied. "Carter and Lane Creative. We build brand strategies for tech companies. I own the firm outright. 30 employees now. Last year's revenue." I tilted my head, savoring the look on Dad's face. 7.3 million. Dad's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his normally composed features. 7 million? I smiled, just enough to show I meant every word. And this loft, I added, is paid for. No mortgage. For once, Dad had nothing to say. The man who always had a plan, always a lecture, now stood speechless, his shoulders sagging beneath the weight of realization. Mom took a tentative step closer. Hannah, why didn't you tell us? I met her gaze. Because when I left, you both made it clear you thought I was making a mistake. That I'd come crawling back. I needed to prove, to myself, not just to you, that I could stand on my own. The tension in the room softened, just slightly, like the first hint of spring after a brutal winter. I reached for the silver locket at my neck, the one Grandma had pressed into my hand the night I packed my bags. Remember who you are, she'd whispered. Mom's eyes followed the movement, recognition flickering there. This, I said, fingers resting against the cool metal, reminded me every day that my worth wasn't measured by anyone's approval. Not even yours. Dad finally exhaled, his voice low. We underestimated you. A single, quiet beat passed. Then another. That, I replied, my voice steady and clear, won't happen again. I let the words hang in the air, letting them take root in the silence. The power had shifted, subtle, undeniable, and for the first time in years, it belonged entirely to me. I rested my palms lightly on the edge of the marble counter, letting the hush settle. The clink of ice in the untouched water glasses was the only sound. Mom and Dad sat across from me on the velvet sofa, their shoulders rounded, not with age, but with the weight of a realization they couldn't yet name. I took a slow breath. I'm not angry, I began, my voice steady. But things are going to be different from now on. Mom's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. Different how? She asked, almost a whisper. You thought moving me into that cramped studio would help, I said, letting the word hang. You've been trying to script my life, deciding what's best without asking me. That ends tonight. Dad leaned forward, his face pale beneath the porch lights spilling through the wide windows. We just wanted you safe. We thought you'd need support. I needed belief, I replied, meeting his eyes. Not a cage disguised as concern. I moved to the mantel and lifted the small silver compass that sat there, the one my late grandmother had given me on my 21st birthday. Its lid creaked softly as I opened it, the needle quivering toward north. Grandma told me, find your own true north and never let anyone hold the map for you. Mom's eyes glistened. She reached for Dad's hand. I returned to the counter and rested the compass in my palm. Here's what I'm offering. I'll keep our family close, but only if we rebuild this relationship on respect. Dad's jaw tensed. And if we can't, then I keep my distance, I said, not unkindly. I won't allow guilt or fear to shrink my life. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. What do you want us to do? I counted them off softly, each word deliberate. First, honesty. No more surprises, no hidden decisions about my future. Second, therapy. Together. We need a space to speak without old patterns choking us. And third, I looked at Dad. Support me without strings. Celebrate my success without trying to claim it or control it. Silence stretched, thick and fragile. Then Dad exhaled, shoulders sagging. If that's what it takes to keep you in our lives, we'll do it. Mom nodded quickly, tears sliding down her cheeks. We will. We didn't realize how much we were still treating you like a little girl. Something in me softened, but I held the compass tight, grounding myself. I'm not that girl anymore, I said gently. And that's a good thing. Dad rose first, crossing the room with a tentative step. He placed a hand over mine, the compass caught between our palms. Your grandmother would be proud, he said quietly. The words settled over me like a long-awaited blessing. For the first time, I believed them. The first snow of the season sifted across the city like a quiet blessing, frosting the rooftops in silver. I stood by the tall window of my loft, coffee warm in my hands, watching the flakes blur the skyline. Below, the streetlights glowed like pearls, soft and distant. 2 weeks had passed since that night, the night my parents stood in this very room, their faces a storm of shock and regret. At first, I hadn't expected much to change. Years of disappointment had trained me to be cautious with hope. But slowly, almost tenderly, change had begun to ripple through the cracks. My mother was the first to reach out. A simple text, hesitant but heartfelt. "I'm proud of you, Natalie." She had never said those words to me before. When we met for lunch a few days later, she brought a small paper bag. Inside was the delicate silver locket my grandmother once wore. I traced the tiny engraving of wildflowers with my thumb and felt the weight of 3 generations of women in that single gesture. Dad followed in his own quiet way. He stopped offering excuses and started asking questions about my business, my plans, even the people who mentored me. He listened, really listened, as though the daughter he had once underestimated now carried stories worth hearing. And my younger brother, the one they once sheltered at my expense. He surprised me most. He called last night, voice steady, to tell me he'd enrolled in night classes. "I want to earn my own way," he said. I believed him. I set the locket on the windowsill now, the moonlight catching its polished edge. It felt like a circle finally closing, my grandmother's quiet wisdom, my own hard-won strength, and the slow awakening of the people who once doubted me. The pain of those early days still lives inside me. It always will. But it no longer defines me. Instead, it has become the steel beneath my skin, the reason I can stand here tonight with both grace and power. I whisper the words Grandma once told me, words I'd carried like a talisman through every sleepless night. Your worth isn't given. It's claimed. And now, with the city glittering below and the snow falling like a promise, I finally understand. I have claimed it.